I enjoyed reading that, so I'm going to read the final part, which is part 3, chapter 6, 1984, by George Orwell. The chestnut tree was almost empty. A ray of sunlight slanting through a window fell on the dusty tabletops. It was the lonely hour of 15. A tinny music trickled from the telescreen. Winston sat in his usual corner, gazing into an empty glass. Now and again he glanced up at a vast face which eyed him from the opposite wall. "Big Brother is watching you," the caption said. Unbidden, a waiter came and filled his glass up with Victoria gin, shaking it in a few drops from another bottle with a quill through the cork. It was saccharine, flavoured with clove, the speciality of the cafe. Winston was listening to the telescreen. At present only music was coming out of it, but there was a possibility that at any moment there might be a special bulletin from the Ministry of Peace. The news from the African front was disquieting in the extreme. On and off he had been worrying about it all day. An Eurasian army, Oceania was at war with Eurasia. Oceania had always been at war with Eurasia, was moving southward at terrifying speed. The midday bulletin had not been mentioned any definite area, but it was probable that already the mouth of the Congo was a battlefield. Brazzaville and Leopoldville were in danger. One did not have to look at the map to see what it meant. It was not merely a question of losing Central Africa. For the first time in the whole war, the territory of Oceania itself was menaced. A violent emotion, not fear exactly, but a sort of undifferentiated excitement flared up in him, then faded again. He stopped thinking about the war. In these days he could never fix his mind on any one subject for more than a few moments at a time. He picked up his glass and drained it at a gulp. As always, the gin made him shudder, and even retch slightly. The stuff was horrible. The cloves and saccharine themselves, disgusting enough in their sickly way, could not disguise the flat, oily smell, and what was worst of all was that the smell of gin, which dwelt with him the night and day, was intoxicably mixed up in his mind with the smell of those. He never named them. Even in his thoughts, as far as possible, he never visualized them. They were something that he was half aware of hovering close to his face, a smell that clung to his nostrils. As the gin rose in him, he belched through purple lips. He had grown fatter since they released him, and had regained his old colour. Indeed, more than regained it. His features had thickened, the skin on his nose and cheekbones were coarsely red, even the bald scalp was too deep a pink. A waiter, again unbidden, brought the chessboard and the current issue of the Times, with the page turned down at the chess problem. Then, seeing that Winston's glass was empty, he brought the gin bottle and filled it. There was no need to give orders. They knew his habits. The chessboard was always waiting for him. His corner table was always reserved. Even when the place was full, he had it to himself, since nobody cared to be sitting too close to him. He never even bothered to count his drinks. At irregular intervals they presented him with a dirty slip of paper, which they said was the bill, but he had the impression that they were always undercharging him. It would have made no difference if it had been the other way about. He always had plenty of money nowadays. He even had a job, a sinecure, more highly paid than his old job had been. The music from the telescreen stopped, and a voice took over. Winston raised his head to listen. No bulletins from the front, however. It was merely a brief announcement from the Ministry of Plenty. In the preceding quarter, it appeared, the 10 three-year plan quota for the bootlaces had been overfilled by 98%. They examined the chess pieces and set out the pieces. It was a tricky ending, revolving a couple of knights, white to play and mate in 2 moves. Winston looked up at the portrait of Big Brother. White always mates, he thought, with a sort of cloudy mysticism. Always, without exception, it is so arranged. In no chess problem since the beginning of the world has black ever won. Did it not symbolize the eternal, unvarying triumph of good over evil? The huge face gazed back at him, full of calm power. White always mates. The voice from the telescreen paused, and added in a different and much graver tone, "You are warned to stand by for an important announcement at 15:30. 15:30. This is the news of the highest importance. Take care not to miss it. 15:30. The tinkling music struck up again. Winston's heart stirred. That was the bulletin from the front. Instinct told him that it was bad news that was coming. All day, with a little spurt of excitement, the thought of smashing defeat in Africa had been in and out of his mind. He seemed actually to see the Eurasian army swarming across the never-broken frontier and pouring down into the tip of Africa like a column of ants. Why had it not been possible to outflank them in some way? The outline of the West Africa coast stood out vividly in his mind. He picked up the White Knight and moved it across the board. There was the proper spot. Even while he saw the Black Horde racing southward, he saw another force, mysteriously assembled, suddenly planted in their rear, cutting their communications by land and sea. He felt that by willing it, he was bringing the other forces into existence, but it was not necessary to act quickly. If they could get control of the whole of Africa, if they had airfields and submarine bases at the Cape, it would cut Oceania in two. It might mean anything: defeat, breakdown, the redivision of the world, the destruction of the party. He drew a deep breath. An extraordinary medley of feelings. But it was not a medley exactly. Rather, it was successive layers of feelings in which one could not say which layer was undermost, struggling inside him. The spasm passed. He put the White Knight in his place, but for the moment he could not settle down to seriously study the chess problem. His thoughts wandered again. Almost unconsciously, he traced his finger in the dust on the table. 2 + 2 = 5. "They can't get inside you," she had said. "But they could get inside you. What happens to you is here forever," O'Brien said. That was a true word. There were things, your own acts, from which you could never recover. Something was killed in your breast, burnt out, cauterized out. He had seen her. He had even spoken to her. There was no danger in it. He knew, as though instinctively, that they now took almost no interest in his doings. He could have arranged to meet her a second time if either of them wanted to. Actually, it was by chance that they had met. It was in the park on a vile, bitter day in March, when the earth was like iron and all the grass seemed dead, and there was not a bud anywhere except a few roses which had pushed themselves up to be dismembered by the wind. He was hurrying along the frozen hands and watering eyes when he saw her not 10 meters away from him. It struck him at once that she had changed in some ill-defined way. They almost passed one another without a sign. Then he turned and followed her, not very eagerly. He knew that there was no danger. Nobody would take any interest in him. She did not speak. She walked obliquely away across the grass as though trying to get rid of him, then seemed to resign herself to having him at her side. Presently they were in among a clump of raged, leafless shrubs, useless either for concealment or as protection from the wind. They halted. It was vilely cold. The wind whistled through the twigs and fretted the occasional dirty-looking creature. He put his arm around her waist.